to my historical fire presentation on the 1944 Hartford Circus fire. On the afternoon of July 6, 1944, tragedy struck the Ringling Brothers Circus during their matinee performance. A fire broke out, causing the big top tent to go up in flames. The tent collapsed, killing or injuring hundreds of circus attendees, and left the circus with a tarnished reputation and banned from the city of Hartford for decades. The circus had arrived in Hartford the day of July 5, 1944, but they were running late due to delays with the railway service. This meant that they were unable to set up for that afternoon's matinee performance, so they scrambled to get everything in place for the evening performance and were able to do so. This was not the first time the Ringling Brothers had brought their circus to Hartford, so they had completed the preliminary registration of their visit and knew who to talk to for the licenses needed once they were on site. On July 6, 1944, the matinee performance began as usual with over 7,000 people in attendance. At 2:40 p.m., fire was spotted on the southwest wall, approximately 20 feet from the main entrance and about 5 feet from the ground. When the circus band noticed the fire, they began to play Stars and Stripes Forever, which alerted all the circus workers that there was an emergency on site. The ushers and police officers who were in the tent began to move the circus attendees out of the tent as calmly as possible. Unfortunately, 2 of the exits were blocked by runways used to move the animals in and out of the tent, allowing only a single file of people to enter or leave the tent. Circus workers who noticed the fire from across the tent grabbed buckets of water positioned near them and ran to the site of the fire, but it was not enough. The workers who were assigned to that southwest area to patrol had left their stations to watch the animal runways to be removed and ensure that the seat jacks were not disturbed and that the seats were stable. This was usually a one-man job, but both went this time. The fire could not be contained, and in the end, over 168 people were killed and at least 484 were injured. These exact numbers are not known due to the severity of the fire, leaving the bodies found in very poor condition and people also leaving the site of the fire without seeking any medical treatment. 2 investigations were conducted immediately following the fire. The first was by Connecticut Police Commissioner Edward J. Hickey, who looked into the cause of the fire. Hickey was also the state fire marshal as part of his commissioner duties, though he was never formally trained in fire investigation. The second investigation was conducted by the City of Hartford Mayor William H. Mortensen, who focused on whether or not the city officials had followed the proper protocols for the circus. During Commissioner Hickey's investigation, it was reported that an officer on site during the fire overheard a man yell, "That dirty son of a bitch just threw a cigarette butt." But despite searching for the man afterward, he was never found. The investigation also found these other details. The tent was not made from fire retardant materials. In fact, it had been treated with a waterproofing method that consisted of mixing paraffin with gasoline, then coating the canvas with it and allowing it to dry, which would then render it waterproof. There are differing reports as to whether or not the circus had a fire retardant tent, or if they could not get one due to the war and the military having priority receipt of the material. The second thing they found was that fire extinguishers were on the premises of the circus, but none were placed under the bleachers in the big top. The circus instead relied on water buckets placed around the perimeter of the tent to put out any fires. The dust and potential for damage to the fire extinguishers was considered a reason to not put them under the bleachers. The circus also had 4 water trucks that could hold up to 1,000 gallons of water with hoses and pumps that had an output of 50 to 60-foot streams of water. These trucks were typically used to wet down the ground around the circus to keep the dust down, water the animals, and provide water for the cookhouse. During the July 6, 1944 performance, the trucks were not manned or placed around the big top, though they were all full of water. And then, as stated earlier, the fourth thing they found is that the workers who were to watch over the southwest part of the tent had left their positions to go make sure the animal runways were not causing issues with the seat jacks. It was determined that if they had been in place when the fire started, they could have potentially put it out quickly with the water buckets in the area, but by the time the other workers got to the point of origin, it was too late to control it. Mayor Mortensen's investigation found information that the city officials had not followed the protocols as set forth in the state statutes and city ordinances. The first thing they found was that the circus had completed their due diligence and obtained the licenses required by the ordinances, but the City Council and the Public Building Commission failed to implement the required conditions to be met for safety, sanitation, insurance, or bonding, and also they did not notify the other city departments, such as the police and fire departments, to let them know that the circus had obtained the license. The Public Building Commission also received 20 to 30 free passes for the circus. The second thing that was found was that Police Chief Thomas Halsey provided the correct license for the circus, but he did not appoint the required number of officers needed to provide the protection and services for an event this size. The circus was running late on July 5th, which caused them to miss that matinee, and they were in a rush to try to get the evening performance on time. So Chief Halsey gave them their license without completing the proper inspections, and in return he received 50 free passes to the circus. The third thing that was discovered was that the fire department was not notified of the circus being in town, so they did not conduct the proper inspections, and therefore they did not provide any resources or suggestions for preventative measures to be implemented. Despite the violation of city and state ordinances and statutes, Mayor Mortenson's investigation found that due to the heroic measures of the police and fire departments during the fire, they were not guilty of any wrongdoing. He also said that while the police chief should not have accepted the free passes, this was acceptable in this case because it was the norm and it was how things worked, but it should not be encouraged in the future. The lack of communication between the different departments was also found to be an issue, and suggestions to improve this communication were made. As a result of the two investigations, the circus was found to be fully at fault, and Hickey arrested 5 Ringling Brothers employees immediately. They were charged with manslaughter, along with a failure to practice property fire drills and provide sufficient employee training, failure to distribute fire extinguishers around the big top, failure to apply a flame retardant mixture to the tent, application to the big top of a flammable waterproofing mixture consisting of gasoline and paraffin, neglecting to provide fire watchers, an absence of supervisors, and obstruction of exits. The fire was deemed to be accidental due to the discarded cigarette that ignited the dried grass and subsequently the wall of the tent. This was Hickey's final report, despite testimony to the contrary from circus workers that this was unlikely based on their experience with cigarettes being routinely dropped from the bleachers. In 1950, Robert Dale Seegey was arrested for arson in Ohio, and during that interrogation, he admitted that he had started the Hartford fire in 1944, as well as other fires throughout New England. In fact, shortly after Seegey had joined the Ringling Circus in late June 1944, there were 2 smaller fires on the circus grounds that he also admitted to starting. Dr. R.F. Bushong declared that while Seegey had mental impairment and psychological issues, he was not insane, and based on the results of the exam, he could be fully capable of starting the fires. When Hickey was made aware of this, he ordered 2 detectives to talk with Seegey, but it is unclear if this ever occurred. Hickey said the detectives did not talk to him, but there is some evidence that they did in fact do so. Regardless of what happened, Seegey stated that he was threatened and that he was now confused about what happened because he did not know if he really did do it or if he was just believing what he was told. In the end, no charges were brought against Seegey despite the doctor's report and the initial interrogation by the Ohio arson investigator. In 1991, the case was reopened, and over the next few years, all evidence was re-examined and Seegey was re-interviewed. During this interview, he indicated that he was not even on site at the time of the fire, and when he returned to the circus that day, the fire was already out. He also indicated that his original confession was forced and he was brainwashed. Seegey effectively withdrew his original confession. In 1993, the case of the Hartford Circus fire was officially closed, and the official clause was changed from accidental to undetermined. The Ringling Brothers accepted the full responsibility for the fire by pleading no contest to the charges. In the end, 6 Ringling employees were charged and served time. In February of 1945, the men were charged with 10 counts of manslaughter and received between 6 months to 7 years in the state prison. The sentences were appealed and were later amended to no time served to a maximum of 5 years. None of the Ringling employees served longer than 8 months and 17 days. Lawsuits were filed immediately following the fire, which totaled over $15 million. The circus only carried a policy covering $500,000, so the lawyers tried to find a way to resolve this. According to Benson's review of the book, The Great Hartford Circus Fire, Creative Settlement of Mass Disasters by Cohen and Bowler, the unique thing about this lawsuit is that it was one of the first mass torts in the U.S., and it was also one of the first to utilize alternative dispute resolution. This sent the claims to private arbitration rather than bogging down the court system and allowed them to be settled quickly. In the end, the Ringling Brothers Circus paid out $3,946,355.70 to settle 551 claims. The circus was able to pay this in full and completed the final payment in December of 1950. Thank you for listening.